This is the video about human trafficking, and I include information about writing the Diverse Perspectives paper. Micro, meso, and macro. In your Diverse Perspectives paper, you must discuss this at the micro personal, meso community, and macro global level. You will talk about what happens to the victims and perpetrators, micro, where it happens in perhaps the Boise or Idaho community at the meso, and how it exists at a global level. You must provide the facts with sources to back this up, cited in the text of your paper and also listed on the citation page. What makes a great Diverse Perspectives paper? A great research question. All the required content is included. All sources are cited in the text of your paper to back up the facts you discuss by paraphrasing or quoting or summarizing that information. You have 10 sources and a citation page that is consistent in style of citation, and font or point size matches the content of the paper. The paper is organized by the required content or in a way that makes sense to you. You have excellent grammar. Your paper is proofread and spell checked. It includes the reflection at the end of your paper, where you answer 2 questions about writing the paper. What will cost you points? No research question, leaving out required content, not citing your sources in the text of the paper, having less than 10 sources or the wrong kind of source, no citation page or it's not consistent in style, font, and point size. Links to sources instead of actual citations will lose you a lot of points. In your paper you have no paragraphs. You have run-on sentences or you have sentence fragments. Your paper is not organized and you're missing the reflection at the end of the paper. The ethical issue, human trafficking. Where does it occur? Micro. Vulnerable women and children are sold, kidnapped, treated badly, forced to work. An example is prostitution, forced labor, and migrant workers. It's not just women and children. Certainly it's men. At the meso level, this happens in Boise and more notably in Portland, Oregon, where Interstate 5 runs up and down the U.S. West Coast, and there's a big shipping harbor. On the macro level, human trafficking happens in every country, and the UN challenges countries to combat crimes associated with this oppressive activity. Who are 2 potential stakeholders? The traffickers. Name a country and who is trafficking and who is benefiting from this activity, and you have traffickers. You also might include factories and governments and people who use the resources that are put together or produced by the victims of trafficking. Victims of trafficking. These are vulnerable, poor, uneducated, seeking work, or they're just kidnapped. What are their respective cultural frameworks? What might be their ethical frameworks? You would have to learn more about the traffickers or the victims to be able to describe this. And in terms of what ethical framework they use to justify what it is they're doing, either as a victim or a trafficker, you need to just know a little bit more about them and see if one of the ethical frameworks applies. So what are some solutions you could name to human trafficking? The Polaris Project, the Victims Trust Fund with the United Nations, and laws that are in any country. You were supposed to, as part of this week's required videos, watch this TED Talk. Human trafficking is all around you. This is how it works. What is your reaction to this video? She cites a lot of stunning information that makes me question where I should buy my fruit and if I should stop at some of the stores that I shop at a lot of the time. From the United Nations, human trafficking is the acquisition of people by improper means such as force, fraud, or deception with the aim of exploiting them. The global action to prevent and address trafficking in persons and the smuggling of migrants is a 4-year joint initiative by the European Union and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, being implemented in partnership with the International Organization for Migration and the United Nations Children's Fund, which is UNICEF. This program aims to assist the selected countries in developing and implementing comprehensive national counter-trafficking and counter-smuggling responses. From the Polaris Project, which is an international organization that seeks to help victims of human trafficking. They say Human trafficking is a form of modern slavery, a multi-billion-dollar criminal industry that denies freedom to 20.9 million people around the world. And no matter where you live, chances are it's happening nearby. From the girl forced into prostitution at a truck stop to the man discovered in a restaurant kitchen, stripped of his passport and held against his will. All trafficking victims share one essential experience: the loss of freedom. More from the Polaris Project. The International Labor Organization estimates that there are 20.9 million victims of human trafficking globally. 68% of them are trapped in forced labor. 26% of those are children, and 55% are women and girls. The International Labor Organization estimates that forced labor and human trafficking is a $150 billion industry worldwide. The U.S. Department of Labor has identified 139 goods from 75 countries made by forced and child labor. In 2016, an estimated 1 out of 6 endangered runaways reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children were likely child sex trafficking victims. From the National Human Trafficking Hotline. For Idaho, in 2017, 44 calls were made to law enforcement and 6 human trafficking cases were opened in 2017. From Project Dove, which is initially a site for victims of domestic violence, they have, the leaders in their community have formed the Tri-County Against Trafficking Task Force to address the issue of human trafficking in Ontario, Oregon, and the surrounding communities in Oregon and in Idaho. If you're in Boise, you're only about 50 miles from Ontario. A globally occurring issue. From Trafficking and Prostitution Reconsidered, New Perspectives on Migration, Sex Work, and Human Rights, the authors state that rather than a new white slave trade, we are witnessing today more broadly an increase in the violation of the rights of freedom of movement, decent employment, and social and economic security. From The International Politics of Human Trafficking, this book discusses the following. Taking issue with the predominant framing of trafficking as sexual exploitation, this book focuses on how contemporary globalization causes labor exploitation, while the concept of trafficking legitimizes states' securitized responses to migration. Questions. Think about this. Do you know somebody who has been a victim of human trafficking? Have you benefited from human trafficking? Have you ever fought against human trafficking?